Okay, welcome to episode one of Mini Mike Politics, a show that covers the fundamentals of government functions and political theories to give a new outlook on current social issues and foreign policy. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name is Kailani Kurth, and I'm a high school student from Idaho. I love the outdoors, being with friends and family, and traveling all across the world while playing volleyball. At just 2 years old, I moved across to Taiwan, a beautiful island off the coast of China, full of diverse cultures and what is one of the most friendliest places I've ever been. Moving at such a young age, I picked up the language, which is they speak Chinese, but it's traditional Chinese. So the only difference is the slang and the characters. And I picked up their culture. I sit like this a lot, but that's also because I'm Filipino, whatever, right? I made so many friends and I just learned so much about the world. And it's definitely been like cultural immersion at such a young age has definitely been one of the biggest impacts on my life. And honestly, I could call it my life story. It's just such a cool thing to like talk to people about, to be like, oh, I actually I grew up in like Asia. Because, Taiwan now, it's a such like and geologically, like geostrategically, like it's such an important place. We rely on Taiwan for, you know, it's like the microchip like industry. Like that's where we get all of our semiconductors. And growing up, my dad was an engineer, and so just growing up under him, I just know a lot about, like microchips and semiconductors. And I bet a lot of the kids out there who are just like me can also tell you about that. Just everything there is to know about semiconductors, and you don't even work in it. You don't even know anything about it. You just know it because you know your parents talk about it. Okay, whatever. Anyways, um, and so I came back to the States about 7 years ago, and by coming back, like my first year back, it was such a culture shock for me, and it's like I had to it's like, well, I don't really know anything about when I was like 2 years old moving to Taiwan, but, like, coming back, that's what I felt like it would have been like. Like, when I was in Taiwan, the food was different. School was so rigorous, like, I would be up all night. Mind you, I was in 3rd grade, or, like, I was in elementary school. School was so rigorous, and, like, that's because their culture, like, norms push education to be number 1 for kids, and, obviously, that should be top priority, but, you know, their mental health comes first even though they're just kids, like, but, high school got way crazier in Asia, and, so I just came back because it was time. But yeah, moving back 7 years ago, I came back maybe like 2018. And that was such a big culture shock for me. Oh, because, like I barely spoke the language. It was really crazy. Like I came back and so I don't know if you know this, but Singlish, it's a bit a mix of in Singapore, people mix Mandarin, which simplified Mandarin, which is not what I learned, but I do speak that now. It was simplified in English. So for reference, they would say like, "You hit me la," and add la to like have it as like an emphasis to end the sentence. I would say that. That's how I would talk to like people, like asking for like I would go down to like my local candy shop and I just I would speak English differently. And, like obviously like coming back, everyone like was like, maybe you guys have seen this clip on like TikTok or like Instagram or something. It's this like completely white kid. He comes back and he's in Singapore, right? And he just speaks English and he sounds like a native, but he's white. And it's just like it's a really funny thing. So like when I came back, like I had this like Chinese teacher, right? But he's a white guy and he wasn't like me. He didn't grow up in Asia, but he was teaching us Chinese because he lived there for a little bit. I had to correct him on some of his Chinese because he did not know how to learn it. And he actually was just brought up in our Chinese class a few days ago. But regardless, doesn't really matter. Okay, back to politics. My love for politics kind of began maybe definitely it has ramped up this year, but like ever since I was like in middle school, I would talk to my dad about topics like regarding politics. Like In 2020, we had, the Black Lives Matter movement with the death of George Floyd by that cop. And, like, we had like so many different things like Asian hate, which living in 2020, as a Filipino American, that has definitely influenced and impacted my life. But, all that stuff, like growing up, talking about politics with my dad, that just like struck something in me. And when I was younger, we had this competition at school. It's called National History Day. Maybe some of you guys know about it. I'm not sure if it's regional, if it's national, but for National History Day, or we call it NHD for short, um, you could choose. There was like a wide. You would be giving a theme, like so. Actually, this is a really fun story. My theme, first year ever doing NHD, was in fifth grade. The theme was breaking barriers through history, and I chose the abolitionist movement. Abraham Lincoln and the slaves. If you didn't know what abolitionist movement was, U.S. history, awkward. But basically, I made a documentary about it because you can choose through a variety. You can make an exhibition, like a poster, like a trifold, um, or you can make a paper. No one ever really wrote papers though, because who wants to write a paper in like fifth grade? Or you could choose a documentary. And starting fifth grade, I chose to do a documentary because my teacher, he really pushed me to do it. And ever since that, oh yeah, I won, by the way. Got like second place at state. Pretty cool. um, but like after my first year of making documentaries, I just kind of like I took it and I ran. And that was like that spark of like doing what I loved, that like that sparked my love for journalism. And so when I was younger, I really wanted to be a journalist, but you know, as I started to grow up a little bit, 2020, such a time, and like, like the Middle East, like the war on terror, like a few like okay, well that was like a decade ago. But I feel like it's definitely still significant with like, like Al Qaeda and the Houthi rebels, especially now if you look at Yemen and Djibouti, the choke point. I'm doing a big research project on that right now, and that just like foreign policy interests me so much. But, anyways, back to journalism. We saw a lot of journalists during that time, like 2020, even now, like in these recent years, journalists like are like at risk of like, we saw a few of them being kidnapped by like terrorist groups and stuff, and like, the US military having to bail them out. So that kind of scared me. But that wasn't a thing back then. Journalists just kind of did their thing. But, through that, I was still into journalism, still into documentary making. I didn't want to be like a filmmaker because I was interested in politics. And, I could say I'm a pretty decent writer. I love, like learning about things, researching things, like, okay, back to Djibouti, learning about like the geostrategic importance of like Djibouti to like, the US and China and like all the countries that have military bases. Because if you didn't know, Djibouti holds like about 7, 8, maybe even more military bases that we don't even know about because it is just in the epicenter of, the Middle East. Because, okay, it's at the Horn of Africa, and there's this really specific choke point called the Bab el Mandeb Strait. And so Djibouti is just a few kilometers away from Yemen. I'm pretty sure it was Yemen. But, that's where the Houthi rebels are, and, like terrorist group like Al Qaeda and like Al Shabaab. I'm sorry if I don't say that right. And then the Abu Sayyaf in like the Philippines, just the epicenter of like all this attention that like in like the U.S. and like other partnership countries have been trying to fight since the war on terror since 9/11. So that stuff really fascinates me if you couldn't tell. So okay, moving forward, I was still into journalism about like seventh, eighth grade, but this is when I really started to dig deep into politics. And like, like my English class, shout out to my English teacher, that class, it's like a politics class. We analyze, like current events, and like I'd be really into it. And through that, I definitely have like recognized that I really like like foreign policy and like current events, like what's influencing our world to, act this way, right? Because honestly, that's a very important part of our lives. Like, obviously, our government, which I'm going to talk about probably the next episode, how our government like functions and how it impacts our daily life. Because, like local governments obviously impact daily lives. Like in Idaho, they just passed like a few bills. Like there's this, I'm not sure which House bill it was, but it was House bill and whatever number it was. And it regarded book banning in public schools and, like public environments where minors could get it, and they banned, like homosexuality, like any books that had homosexuality in it, like even just holding hands, like two people of the same sex holding hands, it was banned. And, anything that had explicit material, so like that would be considered, pornography. And, it'd just be explicit, and they didn't want kids having it, so they kicked them out. It was such a huge moment, right? Book banning. It's crazy. Like we saw it in, Hitler's like Germany, and it was really insane. So just these kind of things like influence our daily lives a lot. But then onto the federal government, the Congress and the executive branch, like all those branches, they influence our daily lives like to the max. Like you probably already know that, but just like I'm going to dive into like how they really affect you, because it's not just like the little things like, you know, our roads, like our infrastructure, like our federal infrastructure is like, our schools that get federal grants and funds. It spans way more than that. And so I learned all of this year. Um, I took a government and politics class, which is political science 101, and it's through this college. I just pressed the power off button on my mic, but it's through this college. And, through that, we learned about, the government, our daily lives, political parties, like in political parties, we learned about like polarization and how, like our government, like our democracies and stuff, like my experience, like gridlock, blah, 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 whatever. And then recently, we've been learning about a lot about the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is very interesting, especially in a point in time now after President Trump got elected. He's kind of trying to cut down on the bureaucracy with, Doge, with Elon Musk. I'm not really sure what Doge stands for, but you know what's up. And like US aid, that's a really controversial topic. Just like everything, about the Trump administration is like really considered controversial right now. So I'm going to try and break down on that. And, obviously, since this is politics, I feel like I should talk about, where I stand on the political spectrum. So, okay, before we begin, like any more politic talks about, especially in the United States, with like, we're such a two-party system. It's very Democrat and then the Republicans, but then now they're being split into, you know, rhinos, Republican in name only, and the true Republicans. And, in Idaho politics, this is such a big topic right now. But regardless, okay, where I stand. I've taken quite a few topology quizzes, I'm pretty sure they're called. Like Pew Research that tell you like what's your like political party, where do you stand on the political spectrum. And through all of them, I've either been neutral, so I've been right in the middle, or I've been a little bit Republican leaning, which is, understandable because like our social agents in life, like our parents, our school, like the people around us, they like influence, like your political beliefs and your political opinions very deeply. So I'm, naturally leaning right because of my parents since they're Republicans. But regardless, that's not going to change anything or anything I talk about on this podcast. It's not going to become like a Joe Rogan podcast or a Dan Bongino podcast. I promise it's not. It's going to be a podcast where we talk about both sides, and we're going to invite a lot of local representatives from both parties so we can get both views on every single topic. Maybe not all of them, but definitely the most significant ones in the news right now. So that's my story. politics is always around us. And hopefully, through this, we get to learn so much more about, you know, politics, and we get to obviously get to view both sides because the news, honestly, it's really unreliable. And if you're going to take away one thing through this episode, it's that just read a lot of sources. And about if you're like curious about any like, issues right now, let's say like the Trump administration and, US aid or any of that stuff, I say read all of the sources. And there's one source, this like one news company, and it's called Ground News. Ground News is great. I'm gonna be, referencing it a lot because one thing that's really great about Ground News is that they offer both sides of, you know, the political spectrum, and it tells you like, oh, this one's gonna be leaning a little bit more left, this one's gonna be leaning a little bit more right. And it's great to like have that resource because, like I said, the United States is such like a two-party system. And, we'll have like Fox News and like CNN, which are like, let's say, I'm gonna say they're very polarized. Like Fox News is extremely, right leaning, and, like we have like the radical left, I'm pretty sure it's called, and like, the conservative like right. Like Fox News, I would say is rightist of right. It's insanely down there on the political spectrum, right? And CNN, it's like pretty down there, right? So it's always good to view the sources that are like pretty in the middle. Like there's like Al Jazeera, they're really good for Middle East. Just my takeaway is just to read everything, and that's how you're really gonna get to the meat and deep of it. And that's how I'm going to talk about, issues on this podcast. I'm really going to talk about like how, like, like some issues are, oh, before I get into anything, I'm going to say, oh, okay, I got this from a source that is right leaning. So you're going to hear biases regarding something, something, something. That's how I'm going to talk about things. And through that, I really hope that helps, like clear up some of the biases since, you know, it's hard to, believe everything when it's coming from, a different party. And then it's just politics is a really confusing topic. And, even for me, I'm just a high school student. I'm no source of authority at all, but it's great to, go through this. And hopefully I can, someday be that source of authority and, be that person. So that is episode one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Next time, we're going to talk about, you know, US government and what is politics, what is government, and how does government affect us. And also, we're going to talk about civic engagement and, how we as high school students can play a role in civic engagement. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a good day.